Hey, this is Robin.
This is Jackie.
And this is Amanda.
And you are listening to We Saw the Devil, a podcast dedicated to horror, true crime, and all things macabre. If you want to follow us between shows, don't forget to check us out online. You can go to our website at www.wesawthedevil.com. You can follow us on Instagram at We Saw the Devil Podcast or on Twitter at We Saw the Devil. And if you want to follow specific co-hosts' social media, you can find the links to those on our website as well. So in today's episode, we will be covering the case of Elisa Lam, the Canadian college student who was found nude and deceased in the water tank on the roof of her hotel in Los Angeles. Now, this case garnered international attention because there are so many bizarre elements in it. You have a young, beautiful college student, a supposedly haunted hotel that's seen suicides and serial killers, creepy CCTV footage, and a mysterious and tragic death that just doesn't seem to make sense. So their timeline surrounding the case is incredibly muddled. There just isn't a lot of verified information on anything, it seems. Even the original police conferences gave minimal information to the public. So we decided to bring on a guest who can help us out. Jake Anderson is an author and investigative journalist who spent the last 5 years self-funding a full investigation into Elisa Lam's death. He hired private investigators, he interviewed original members of the law enforcement and medical examiner team that were originally assigned to the case. He went to the Cecil Hotel and retraced her exact step. He spoke with people who saw her in her final days. He interviewed people who were there the day that her body was found. His upcoming book, Gone at Midnight, The Mysterious Death of Elisa Lam, comes out on February 25th and basically chronicles his search for the truth behind the case. And Jake was kind enough to join us to help us try to put the pieces together. He will be sharing findings in this episode on the case that no one has heard yet. So you'll be hearing it for the first time, and I think I can say, speaking for all of us, that it definitely changed our minds. Okay, so Amanda, would you like to kick it off by giving the listeners a quick rundown of the case?
Sure. So this case brought so many people together because it had so many different aspects that people could argue about. It started in 2013 when Elisa Lam made her way to Los Angeles, California, and stayed at the Cecil Hotel. Now, during the stay, she started acting very strange, and there was a video of her in an elevator that went viral. We'll talk more in detail about this video, but essentially she was acting very strange in the elevator, and that's the last time that anyone saw her alive. And then a couple weeks later, after her disappearance, people staying at the hotel complained of water pressure, taste, smell, and look of their water, which sent a maintenance worker to the top of the hotel to look in the water tank. And there he found Elisa Lam's body. Now, the big thing is no one knows how she got into the tank. And that's kind of where the interest to this case continued. And no one knows how she got there. There are various theories and arguments, and you could probably read things online for weeks, getting different opinions on this case. What you'll see when you do research this case is everything from paranormal to conspiracy theories, all the way to mental health discussions.
That case is so incredibly sad.
I recall the first time I heard that case, I was up late at night and I couldn't sleep, and the video was pretty terrifying, not gonna lie, and I wanted to know what happened to her.
No, I agree. I remember the first time I saw the video, and honestly, even to this day, when I see the elevator video, I still get chills because I can't explain why she's doing some of the things she's doing. Now, later on, when we talk about the video, there is some things that might explain what's going on, but still, even after reading some explanations, it still gives me chills.
I'm super stoked for us to deep dive into this case because I've been intrigued by it for years.
And this is the anniversary week of her disappearance.
So we thought it would be a good idea to talk about it and try to understand a little bit more of what she was going through and what might have happened to her.
Okay, so I think it's time to bring Jake Anderson on. The timeline of the case has been pretty muddled since the very beginning. A lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation. So maybe Jake can help us out with that. So, Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. Trying to find someone who's put the time and effort and resources into researching this case, because, as I'm sure you're aware, the public timeline is very, very cloudy and muddled as
Right.
far as what the public has been told and what has been released to the public. So, thank you again for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. You guys got a great podcast, so I'm honored to be on it.
Well, we appreciate that. Let's start out. How did you get involved with the Elisa Lam case as a whole?
So the origins for it for me were the same as with most people. A friend sent me the link to the surveillance video. There was something about it that felt strange and disturbing, but for reasons I didn't fully understand. And I would kind of return to it off and on. And, I started, kind of getting more engaged in it. As it started to unfurl, kind of as new information came out, as they, kind of discovered the body and everything, it just kept getting more and more existential. I don't know. It was just not a normal true crime case. One of the initial things that I was really fascinated by was kind of the obsession with it. I think, for lack of a better word, it's used a lot, that the case almost seemed kind of like a Rorschach test for people. Psychologically, they would, no matter what their worldviews are, they would find some reason to apply them to this case. So you get all these very strange interpretations of paranormal activity and demonology, and then some of them more outlandish conspiracy theories. And I used to study conspiracy theories, sometimes adhering to them, but usually just kind of fascinated with the psychology behind it. And I've never seen a case, and I document a lot of them in my book. I've never seen more bizarre conspiracy theories that people believe to the bottom of their soul. This is a very emotional case for people. This is something I realized early on, is that people had an emotional investment in it. For me, one of the things that interested me pretty early on is when I started reading Elisa's blogs and realized that she suffered depression and whatnot. And that interested me because, I've struggled with that myself. The more I read her posts, the more I kind of felt a personal connection to her. And I wasn't the only one. If you go on her blog posts and read the comments underneath it, it's just become a kind of almost like community of people using her case to discuss mental illness. And so it's kind of this combination of people simultaneously feeling sympathy for her, but then also kind of stigmatizing mental illness, people not able to accept kind of dark, grisly things can happen. So I went into the case fully believing that it was just an accident, and that people were kind of stigmatizing the mental illness part of it because they don't fully understand it. And particularly when as I got further in, I realized it wasn't just depression she was struggling with, but bipolar disorder. And that actually runs in my family. And I found, my aunt had it, and it ultimately took her life. And I've had a couple of really close friends that almost died because of it. Suicide is very shockingly common, or at least suicide attempts are very shockingly common. I'm not, trying to make myself sound more sympathetic or anything, but just, mental illness is it's an epidemic right now, and people don't really know how to deal with it. People are just really discovering how to talk to their friends and loved ones about it. And so this case, I feel like, was kind of like a harbinger of that. All these new statistics are showing, how big of a problem depression and bipolar disorder are. And it's just very difficult to deal with, and we can get more into that later. But still still answering your first question, that was kind of how I got into the case. Was I was going to write kind of like a sociological essay, or a longer piece if it lent itself to it, about kind of that psychological aspect of it. And of course, there's a part of me that's always been interested in parapsychological phenomenon as well. Sometimes more from a skeptic's point of view, but just the history of the hotel was interesting to me. So all of that kind of lent itself to me digging deeper into the case. And it just kind of kept going and kept going. And every time I thought that I was going to stop researching it, some new synchronicity would connect back to the case and just kept me digging. And ultimately, I started to try to make a documentary about it with my friend Jared. And ultimately, the book turned out to be the best way to tell the story.
And for those that don't know, when does the book come out?
Okay, it's released February 25th. You can pre-order it now, Goodreads or Amazon. It's called Gone at Midnight: The Mysterious Death of Elisa Lam. And it's getting good publicity. I think people are interested in it. I think everyone who's interested in this case, even though there's wildly different reasons why people are interested in this case, I think there's something for everyone in it in terms of the totality of the case, why it's so fascinating on so many different levels.
So I know Robin was going to
It
start
really
a little
does.
bit with just some basic stuff, and then we were going to toggle into the timeline of the events that we know of. And then if you want to
Sure.
help fill in some of the stuff, be our guest.
I'll do the best I can. Some of it's still unknown.
Okay, of course.
But yeah, let's go. Let's figure out as much as we can.
Her parents immigrated from Hong Kong and opened up a
Yeah.
restaurant in a town outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. So she ended up going to the University of British Columbia as a student. And when she was 21, she decided to travel. She wanted to go on her quote unquote West Coast tour. And so she embarked to California.
I went through and got some of the dates from her blog, so we can share that too. It's a Tumblr blog, and she posted quite a bit of fashion. There's some blog posts that are her writings, and then there's also a way of reposting. So for those that haven't used Tumblr before, it is a little convoluted. It's not like Facebook, but she did share a lot of information on it. Um, so from what we can put together is she started planning this trip, and she started planning it around the 13th, it looks like, is when she might have booked, according to her blog. On January 23rd, she does mention that she got lost in an airport. So we've all done that.
Mhm.
And then I believe she made it to San Diego on the 24th. Spent a couple days in San Diego. And one thing we'll note too, and this might come into more detail later, but on the 25th, while in San Diego, she does talk about how she stuffed herself silly with a $3 meal. She also talks about how she
Right.
stayed in a hostel, so money saving. And I think that might be playing a role later as to why she chose this specific hotel in Los Angeles. So
Right.
on January 26th, Elisa Lam did arrive in LA. Now, here's one thing that I cannot find a reputable source for. Wikipedia says that she checked into the Hotel Cecil 2 days later. However, CNN says she checked in the same day she arrived.
Yeah, so that was a big mystery that really kind of drove me crazy for a while. And to confirm, yes, she did go to San Diego first, and she lost her phone there. Now, it appears that she maybe had a second phone when she was in LA, and I think there's a post of a friend of hers on Tumblr saying that she had lost her phone in San Diego after leaving the hostel, and then he, I think, maybe gave her another phone to use. As when she arrived to LA, and then when she arrived at the Cecil Hotel, that's still up in the air. I originally, one of the things I was so confused as is that she seemed to have arrived in LA on the 26th, but then she didn't check into the hotel until the 28th.
Right.
So I was very confused as to, and I thought maybe that was a missing clue that we needed to look into, is what was she doing and where was she staying, more importantly,
Yes.
for those days, for the 26th and the 27th.
Correct.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
the blog post that I
Oh, no, go ahead.
noticed is the one on the 29th made it sound like she was staying close by where she could see the hotel, but wasn't quite staying there. But everything I've read says that she was there by that time. But on Tumblr, she said, I have arrived in Law Land. I'm thinking LA Land. And there's this monstrosity of a building next to the place I'm staying. When I say monstrosity, mind you, I'm saying as in gaudy. But then again, it was built in 1928, hence the Art Deco theme. And yes, it is classy, but since it's LA, it went on crack. Fairly certain this is where Baz Luhrmann needs to film The Great Gatsby. So I don't know what she's talking about there.
Right. Well, she was very obsessed with The Great Gatsby. She references it a lot in her posts and reblogs a lot of pictures from the movie and stuff. The best I think we're going to get right now is I interviewed someone for the book who is a web sleuth based in England. And what he did is he did something he calls a timestamp map. And what he did is he went in and he viewed the metadata of every single one of her Tumblr
Oh,
posts.
wow.
And by doing that, was trying to trace where she was for every single post. And you can only do that for her actual posts, reblog, queued
Right.
posts, which are basically reblogs that will go up at some point later. He couldn't look at the data for that. But based on what he looked at, he thinks that she got to the hotel on the 26th. And, this guy basically thinks that she was very unused to not having regular internet access. Based on his analysis of her previous posts, she had pretty much been on the internet and specifically on Tumblr for pretty much every single day for months prior to
Mhm.
that. And then suddenly she gets to LA and she has bad internet access in her room, which is kind of a complaint you hear pretty common
Right.
there. And she maybe was not able to access the internet in her room, but maybe she could access it in the lobby of the hotel. But either way, basically, he says that he thinks that contributed a lot to her anxiety. And yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of angles to go in here. As far as the exact timeline, I my feeling is that she did probably check in on the 26th, but I'm not sure without, as you know, there's very few firsthand witnesses that will talk about it,
Right.
including the women she stayed with there.
Yes.
She was originally in a shared room, and then for the first 2 nights, I think, and then something about her behavior was making those women uncomfortable, and so they asked to have her moved to a different room. Now we don't know who those women are. They were never interviewed by anyone, and there's just really literally no way to find them at this point.
As we have mentioned earlier, and I believe since you have joined as well, so the Cecil Hotel was effectively in Skid Row, or at least beside it. Are you familiar with in 2013 the placement? We did an overhead Google Earth kind of search of the Cecil Hotel, and you can see the tents and the tarp 1 block away from it. The Cecil Hotel has been notorious for housing criminals and drugs, serial killers, so on and so forth. How bad in 2013, when Elisa Lam stayed there, was the Cecil Hotel's inhabitants and the outside, like direct? Was it bad? Was it hardcore Skid Row or
So yeah, the
outskirts?
history of the Cecil Hotel in that area is something I go into. I mean, I definitely think there's room for greater biographical information on the hotel, but its placement in downtown. So basically, I mean, it is in the Skid Row area for sure. However, because of the gentrification efforts that have been going on there for decades, Skid Row basically keeps getting moved, basically making the Skid Row area smaller, and they keep moving it because the business owners there, the venture capitalists that are coming in, and they're trying to, and there's been numerous iterations of this, of going in and trying to turn the buildings there into these kind of like really youth focused, international business traveler focused money pots. And that's essentially what two different owners of the hotel tried to do in the early part of this century. And they failed each time. Now, to its credit, so I mean, technically, Skid Row is just basically a couple blocks away from Cecil Hotel, but it's definitely still a dangerous area. The history of the hotel itself is kind of interesting because while it has this really corrupt history that we'll get into, it's actually one of the only hotels that has made itself consistently available to low income tenants. All the other hotels have, for lack of a better word, sold out and basically just made a total bourgeois hotel and just tried to make as much money as they can. And for whatever reason, the owners of the Cecil Hotel, they kept trying to do that, but they kept failing. And so ended up, it just remained as this incredibly low income place where you had two different kinds of tenants. So it was a hotel that people could stay in. It was also basically a resident style place where it had tenants that lived there year round. And those tenants lived on the upper floors, whereas the hotel people would be in the bottom floors, which makes it even more mysterious as to what Elisa was doing up on that
Right. That's where
14th
she was
floor
moved, right?
in the surveillance.
After staying.
No, she was moved. She was moved to another room on the 5th floor. She basically stayed on the
Oh,
same
okay.
5th floor. We don't know why she was on the 14th floor, except perhaps. I mean, I have my theories in terms of just her moving around and whatnot. But the hotel is absolutely. I mean, that whole area is definitely dangerous. There's many sex offenders that live in that area. I looked it up. I mean, you can look up, the records of sex offenders living in an area. There's dozens, and then there's several within the hotel itself.
All right, guys. So now that we've been talking about the hotel a bit, so Hotel Cecil, or otherwise known as Stay on Main, do we want to go into the history a bit?
That'd be wonderful.
It was obviously it's located in Los Angeles. It was built in 1924 by William Banks Hanner and designed by Loy Lester Smith. Originally, it was supposed to be a destination for business travelers and tourists. It was very high end, luxurious. It was supposed to be amazing. It did open in 1927, and it did pretty well until about the 1940s, and that's kind of where things started going a little south. The U.S. was hit by the Great Depression in about 1929, and then years later, in order to stay open, it did have to reduce its rates to match the surrounding area and what it had become. So just a couple blocks down the road is Skid Row. So that started attracting drug addicts, sex workers, runaways, just all of that stuff. And from there, it became more notorious. There's tons of suicides, random deaths, and even some serial killers stayed there.
So, Jake, have you, in your research and time since you've been looking at the Elisa Lam case, have you been in the Cecil Hotel? Have you walked around? Can you give us kind of an overview of what it's like and what you experienced in kind of all facets?
Yeah, So I went there twice, stayed there by myself, which I don't recommend because it's just you get a very strange feeling, and I'm not even at the risk of sounding, like chauvinistic or I don't know, arrogant or something. I'll say that I don't get scared, but like it takes a lot to freak me out. Like I'll watch horror movies like before I go to bed just to get sleepy. Like it takes a lot to scare me, and this place just has a energy to it that it's just like it really has a life of its own. Like it's its own mind operating there. And at first I kind of just thought that I was being hysterical, or maybe I was creating it psychosomatically because of the research I'd been doing. But and that's very possible. I went back and I did just really meticulous research on the history and add on a little bit to your outline of the history. But I mean, I don't want to go too in depth. I mean, I did so much research on this. Like I know stuffed their pillows back in 1924. They originally they stuffed their pillows with goose and duck feathers. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just really obscure crap that really no one needs to know. But the history of the hotel is definitely something that's really hard to overlook in any kind of way. Because it's like there's a curse on the place. Like you said, it was built in the mid 1920s, and there were problems with it, criminally speaking, even before the Great Depression. But the Great Depression really just kind of set off this whole curse, I guess, of suicides that took place there. And it was just one after another, and it was just a great deal of people jumping out the windows and doing, horrible things to each other. There was at least one woman was, brutally murdered there, and I'm pretty sure there were others. And two different serial killers that lived there, Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger from Austria, and he basically, I mean, those are separate stories in and of themselves. And I go into the history of those serial killers and how they wound up at the Cecil Hotel, and that's kind of its own story. But the history definitely kind of plays into the creepiness of it. For one, the floor where Elisa Lam was filmed in the surveillance video. So that was the 14th floor,
Hmm.
and that's the same floor that Richard Ramirez lived on
Hmm. Hmm.
when he was living at the Cecil Hotel. Like that's where he came back with blood on him, literally with a woman's eyeballs in his pocket one time.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, Maxine something. I can't remember her name, but it was a lawyer, a woman who, and she actually fought back. And yeah, Richard Ramirez didn't like it when people fought back, and he originally tried to cut her heart out,
Oh
but
my gosh.
he was having trouble getting through the cartilage, so he just said, "Oh, I'll just take her eyeballs." And synchronistically, at that time, he was very obsessed with the song "Eyes Without a Face" by Billy Idol, and he would listen to that song obsessively. And I guess maybe it seeped into his subconscious, and he decided he would actually take some eyes.
Wow.
But anyway,
And just to add on more
Well,
for our listeners, that was Maxine Zazara, and she and it looks like her husband were discovered with bullet holes in their heads on March 29th, 1985 in their home. So it sounds like Richard Ramirez took a little souvenir from the scene
right.
as well.
Well, and as far as Richard Ramirez goes, one thing I wanted to say too, because we had this issue a couple months ago, he is real for all the American Horror Story nuts. They thought he was made up and he was just a character. And then there have been some accounts too from his killing days that when he was staying there, he would murder someone and then occasionally toss his clothes in the dumpster outside and then walk in just his underwear or sometimes naked. And because it was such a shit show there, no one would even turn an eye. They just go, oh, okay, that's a guest. At least he's not, overdosing in the hallway.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's how bad.
there's a lot of crazy shit that went on there, and I interviewed this woman who lived there in the I think late '90s or something. She lived there for about a decade. She couldn't speak directly to that case, though. Based on what she experienced, she was certain Elisa had been killed, basically because her experience with the hotel was that there was always these very predatory employees that worked there. And it's hard to corroborate some of her stuff. These are just her experiences, but
Mhm.
I feel like they were worth putting in. But she had a friend, a close friend, who was raped by an employee there, an employee that used the master key to enter her room and then basically extorted her at risk of eviction to not speak about it. It's gotten better. It's definitely gotten better. But it was definitely a cesspool for a very long period of time. And what I heard from people is that even the police really didn't want to go inside there, and they would avoid it at all costs. And
Wow.
so it kind of created this lawless quality to the place that just bred more crime. And there's just really a lot of mysteries there that you can't get information about. Really weird stuff, like I mean, I don't even want to go into it because it'll sidetrack us too much. But
It's
but
Amanda,
interesting though.
Amanda and I were
yeah,
talking that we could have a separate show just on the happenings of the hotel itself and just
oh
all of the
yeah, yeah.
dark things.
There's so much to go over here. But yeah, another thing about the history that kind of played into to get back to my visits there. We discussed how many different suicides there have been.
Hmm.
There, people jumping out the windows and whatnot. So a psychic I interviewed for the book. It was a psychic. Her name was Natalie Davis, and she happened to stay at the Cecil the same week Elisa was there.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
she didn't know this, of course, at the time. She didn't know till later that she was there at the same time. She went back and checked the dates. She also didn't know at the time she was staying there anything about the hotel. So it was kind of a blind study in terms of she didn't go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to get material for my paranormal career. It just kind of happened. And she wrote a whole post about it on a site called Documenting Reality. But not only did I and her feel it, I talked to another person, a person who stayed there, who is absolutely not the kind of person that would. I mean, I'm surprised this person even told me. It was just because it's so unlike them to even discuss that. They felt it, and then finally, it's worth pointing out that on the day she died, Elisa shared an image on her Tumblr account. And the image is literally a body falling from a building. And it's just one of the many synchronicities that went on in this case where it just kind of feels like there's information from the past that keeps getting cycled through over and over again on loop.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if it's a sentient spirit. I don't even like to talk about that stuff too much. I think it really could be paranormal stuff, really just could be information from the past echoing.
Mhm.
And if consciousness has a kind of informational transfer, which more and more scientists are really starting to believe that the core of the universe basically is information. And since our consciousness is a kind of transmitter of that frequency, it's, to me, I think, reasonable to think that if someone dies a really traumatic death, some of the information from that experience could kind of be imprinted on the surrounding environment. She was off her meds, and which brings us to another narrative there. And those two narratives kind of intersect, as she had gone off her bipolar medications. It's just kind of a perfect storm, I think, for her, and really just a tragic thing for her, definitely.
And I can agree too, when you are there, and I didn't go inside, I went last year, and just being even in that entryway, you feel very heavy. Like it's just a sad area. And not only is its surroundings not very good, but you don't feel great being there. So I'm sure that anyone staying there probably felt that same feeling.
No, I think that it's important to in order to deep dive, and like we discussed in the very beginning when we first brought Jake on, there are so many different theories for this case that range from the paranormal to murder to suicide, accidental, mob head. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So as far as, and I don't want to linger too long on it for obvious reasons, but as far as for the paranormal aspect itself, when, Jake, are you aware that the hotel itself kind of became known as like a haunted hotspot? Like ghost hunters all across the country, paranormal enthusiasts, have flocked to this hotel for decades. So in your research, do you know really when the hotel itself kind of became an epicenter for that?
I mean, it was known as a creepy place. Basically, the tenants called their home, they called the place Suicide Hotel. So it already had a pretty crazy legacy. And then two different serial killers, one in the 80s, one in the 90s. That just added to the mythology. And, not to mention the fact that like every person I've ever interviewed who lived there has said, if I ask, I mean, do you think this is, sorry to ask such a cliche question, but do you think the place is haunted? They're always like, oh yeah, that goes without saying. Like everyone who has ever lived there just basically accepted it. And, whatever it is, I don't know if it's information, whatever the hell it is. But definitely the Elisa Lam case is what really took this thing to the next level as far as it becoming a, ground zero destination of paranormal tourism. That really went into overdrive, after 2013. It was definitely a paranormal spot before that for sure, but it wasn't in the same category as like that forest in Japan or, some of the other places. And it doesn't have the kind of luster and appeal of some of those other places. No one really wants to go hang out in that area of LA, especially not at night. It's not a safe place. There's just a lot of, economic injustice that has taken place there that's still going on with, the gentrifying of the neighborhood, the pushing, kind of shepherding of all the different homeless people into a smaller and smaller area without, it's just a scary, weird place. Like it just doesn't feel right to see so much economic injustice in one place. And that hotel just kind of embodies it.
All right, so that kind of brings us back to January 31st then. That's the first day that her daily phone calls to her parents had stopped, the last time she was ever seen. Now, one question that I see a lot online is the elevator video.
Yeah, it might blend into, my understanding, it was recorded around approximately the midnight time of January 31st. So technically that would overlap into February 1st. But It's hard to know exactly when it was filmed, but that the basic thinking is that it was around midnight, January
Okay.
31st.
So for sure, that's the last known appearance of Elisa Lam. And then right before that, during the day, she also made a trip to a bookstore. It's called the Last Bookstore. And one of the employees there, Katie Orphan, did talk to her and say that seemed like a normal conversation. She was buying some gifts for her family, was a little worried about them fitting in her luggage, and everything seemed like, a normal, common interaction with her. So that's the last time she was seen where she actually spoke with someone that came forward.
I can
Okay.
actually add a little bit to that.
Sweet.
So I found another person who talked to her, and I think technically this would have been either right before or right after Orphan. But this guy, it was at the same place, the Last Bookstore. This guy was a customer. I can't even remember how we got in touch with him, but when we were first starting to do stuff for the documentary, somehow he reached out to us, and so we interviewed him. And so he's, I think, interesting because he basically had almost the opposite experience that Orphan did. His experience was that Elisa was he was disturbed by her. He felt that she was very unstable. I mean, basically, he felt like she was in the middle of some manic episode because she was just really aggressively talking without waiting for a response, talking to strangers, asking random questions of strangers. And his feeling was this is dangerous, that like she should not be in downtown LA acting like this with strangers. Now, in some ways, I think his perception is a little. I don't necessarily like the value judgments he's making. It's anyone's right to talk however they want, and it's really not his place to say whether he thinks someone was mentally ill. But it contextually, it is worth mentioning because we know the backstory of her struggle with mental illness, and because it paints a total opposite picture of how she was acting. And basically he just he was worried about her. He was disturbed by her behavior and was worried about her.
When you talked to him, did you ask him why he didn't come forward or get interviewed, or did he just not want to be on camera?
Yeah, no, he did. He
Oh,
basically contacted the LAPD and they never got back to him. And
wow. That's
it's
an
yet
interesting tidbit.
it's one of the many instances I found of the LAPD just totally not doing their due diligence. I mean, that's like literally the best thing you could say about their investigation. And it's the reality is, well, we'll get into what I think was going on with them, but yeah, it's interesting that they wouldn't have gotten back and interviewed one of easily the last person who spoke with her
Right.
with information that's totally relevant to how she would have what could have happened to her. And the same thing happened when I spoke to the LAPD psychologist, who I was actually surprised agreed to talk to me.
Well, yeah, you're
Um,
one of the few then.
Very few.
and and he said that the detectives involved in the case did not once inquire with him or anyone on the psychology team at the LAPD. The detectives totally had zero curiosity about anything involving that. Here they are blaming the death purely on mental illness with no evidence of drowning, and we can get into that in a minute. They're assuming it's all because of mental illness, but they didn't do any background check on the material conditions or even the nature of bipolar disorder at all.
Crazy that she can speak to, I mean, Katie Orphan and come off as one perfectly put together person and then speak to someone else and have a different interaction altogether, which I guess it definitely can happen. Or was Katie Orphan remembering it differently or saying it differently, I guess?
Tried to speak with Katie Orphan, and she acted like I was a CIA agent. So, I mean, she was like, I just feel uncomfortable talking about this without the family being involved. I'm like, lady, you already gave an interview on the news. Like,
Right, right.
it's too late to back out and not talk about someone. You've already done it.
It seems
Well,
to
I
me,
did read, or maybe I saw it in one of the news stories, that people have been reaching out to this bookstore still, trying
Oh,
to talk to
yeah.
her.
She's probably sick of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
frankly, I don't really care because I don't really think the information, unless she had more information that she hadn't told the information she provided really wasn't materially significant at all.
Well, I mean, it does suggest that she planned on going home to her family is the only relevance I could get from it.
Good point. Yeah.
I don't know if you've looked into other accidental drowning cases, but it seems to me that there's kind of an epidemic with how they review the cases for a lot of them, where there's many cases that have come forward, like the smiley face murders and stuff. They were like retired New York City homicide detectives, and they went through a lot of different cases and stuff, and they actually got them overturned to homicide because a lot of evidence is lost. And when something is labeled as an accidental drowning, it seems like they just kind of throw it to the side and they're like, we don't care anymore. We're not going to go in depth. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can get into the whole cause of death. I looked into whether or not it could have been a suicide. People I don't think realize, most people haven't read her blog posts except for the most commonly quoted ones. But after extracting all of her autobiographical posts, it filled up about 100 single space pages of a document. This was just literally like a swan dive into her mind. And she spoke about her struggle with bipolar extensively. I mean, and to me, that's why this case is so valuable, because it's really just like a first person expose of what it's like to deal with depression and bipolar disorder. And she spoke of suicide quite often. She didn't say she was going to do it necessarily, but she was not constantly, but there's at least 4 or 5 different times where she says, I don't think I could do it unless I thought I was turning schizophrenic. She would say, I'm not suicidal. But then some days she would say, that she was leaning closer to that. I don't think it was suicide, although she does make this point of, I don't think I would commit suicide unless I thought I were turning schizophrenic. Now, that's significant because bipolar disorder, especially when it's untreated, and she was off of her main mood stabilizer and bipolar med. It was out of her system. The only thing that was in her system was Wellbutrin, which is an atypical antidepressant that only really works on dopamine. And she had one other, venlafaxine, which is another antidepressant. But the symptom, a person with severe bipolar, which it does seem like she had, because she would go through these huge hypomanic rants, and she even called them adventures in hypomania, where she wrote in all caps, and it was clearly hypomania. When someone has untreated bipolar disorder, you can experience hallucinations, profound delusions. You can basically feel like you're schizophrenic. And in fact, I spoke to a psychologist whose very father had been diagnosed with schizophrenia for 20 or 30 years before they finally realized, no, he just has really bad bipolar disorder.
Oh, wow.
If she felt that maybe, and off her meds at that hotel with all of the strange energy going on there, and what I think, which is I think there were some creepers there that were trying to do things to her. It's totally reasonable to me that she might think that she was turning schizophrenic, and maybe she lived up to her promise and said, I wouldn't do it. Now, I don't think she did commit suicide, and I particularly because to even have found the water tank on the roof in the dark is almost incomprehensible to me. First of all, drownings represent like 1% of suicides. It's a very rare form of suicide. I just can't imagine her basically going skinny dipping in this weird dark tank on a roof that she wouldn't even have known about to commit suicide. I don't buy that.
So then she did arrive in LA on the 26th. And here's kind of a debate that is being talked about everywhere is, when did she actually check into the hotel? So Wikipedia says she checked in 2 days later. However, CNN says she checked in the same day she arrived. There's some blog posts that even leave it up in the air where it sounds like she was staying nearby or next door looking into the hotel. So that's a mystery. And then when she did check in, we talked about how she was on a budget. So she opted for a hostel-like room with 2 other roommates who then complained of her odd behavior, and then she was put into a private room by the hotel staff. And everywhere I've looked, I have not seen anything about these roommates.
No, there's nothing. They might as well not even exist. They were never named. Journalists never got to ask them questions. The police detectives didn't even say whether they'd even spoken to these women, which is unfortunate because it would shine a lot of light on it. I have no doubt that she was probably acting strange. I mean, that was their testimony, or not testimony, but that's what they said. I spoke to another primary witness who discussed that she was acting strange, hypomania, and just her firsthand descriptions of. I mean, if you read her blogs, like, there's no doubt that she was dealing with some pretty severe mental illness.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
But as far but and this is a major point I make in the book, is that mental illness and homicide are not mutually exclusive. In fact, women with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of sexual assault. They are sociopaths and predators will target people that they think are vulnerable in some way.
Yeah, that is
So the
correct.
fact that she was experiencing mental illness should not in any way uh, make people come to the automatic conclusion that her death was an accident.
Typically,
Agreed.
I
And
find that a lot of people who suffer from bipolar, if they're going to show suicidal ideation, they will have like attempts in their record. Did she have any attempts?
Right? No, I don't think she did. She never wrote about any.
and her
Um,
sister, I think, said that she never did.
And see, I also found when I was going down the rabbit hole, someone said that she had made one attempt. But what's so frustrating about this case, and one we're also glad to have Jake on, is that there's been so much misinformation or the facts added on after the case, or
right.
you're not sure. It's so cloudy what's actually true and what has been stated. So,
Yeah.
and very,
Tons
very,
of.
very few reputable sources out there too.
If she, it's totally possible she attempted. If she did, she never publicly wrote about it. And given how intimate and honest she gets in her blog posts, I'd be very, very surprised if she didn't talk about it. She talks about literally every other aspect of it. And she even at one point contradicts herself on whether she'd ever been sexually assaulted before. At one point, she basically claims that she was sexually assaulted when she was 17. And then in the only other post on that subject, she says, I've never been sexually assaulted." So that's an issue, I think, as well. If she'd been sexually assaulted before, I think it could help explain some of her behavior in the elevator.
What you had said too, as far as like some creepers possibly, she addresses that in her blog on the 27th, that she went out and she said, I really hope no creeper comes near me, kind of referencing that it happened during this trip.
Right.
Um,
I think I was really obsessed with that comment based on what I've looked into, and particularly the web sleuth who did the timestamp map and traced the metadata. I think that comment about creepers was in San Diego.
yeah, yeah. So, something happened during, I'm just saying, the trip in general,
Right. Yeah.
to where already she's addressing these creepers, and then that night, the 27th, is when she went to the speakeasy.
I wouldn't assume that she came in contact with creepers. I know a lot of women who travel alone who have that fear, especially if she does have a like past history of sexual assault. I mean, I would say that, the verbiage and the wording is very particular to how she just hopes that it doesn't happen. It could be intuition. It could be just like her just hoping that she's safe on her journey.
I mean, it definitely could, but I mean, it seems like, if someone's going to say it in their blog, it seems like it happens frequently to her. Or maybe she's misunderstanding someone talking to her being a creeper. But she does say that they go after you strong. So, like, I feel like that means someone was like, when she was trying to give them vibes of, I'm not interested,
Yeah.
they were not taking the bait. And honestly, in clubs, that happens. If you're a female, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it shouldn't. It really, really
Yeah.
shouldn't.
She wrote an interesting thing in her blogs a couple weeks before her trip. It was basically, I can almost state it verbatim. It was, if you're a teenage girl and an older man comes up with you and starts talking to you, he wants to have sex with you, period.
Mm.
That's a paraphrase, but and she speaks a lot about the intentions of men. So it was definitely something that she thought about a lot. And whether there was anyone in the hotel, I mean, that's the big question, and we can get into that as to what was going on in that hotel. But you're right, it's almost shocking how little information, for as popular as this case is, it's just almost shocking how little information has come from the three primary sources of information, which would
Mhm.
be the hotel, the police, and the family.
Hmm.
Pretty much all of them have been shut off since almost the beginning,
Mhm.
Right.
and so it's created this breeding ground of conspiracy theories and disinformation that has, just taken this case to a whole different level. What I can say is that I think that there were employees there who were making her uncomfortable. There's reason to think, based on some of the police reports and some of what the detectives said, that initially they thought that maybe someone had brought her to the roof. I don't know why they would
Huh.
think that, but the deputy coroner, really, it was kind of a coup to get this guy to speak to me, and I spoke with him twice on the phone. So this was a guy, he's now retired, and I think the reason he spoke with me was because he wants to write a book about his career as a coroner, and so I think he was trying to like kind of tap me a little bit in terms of, being a writer and an editor and whatnot. He had some interesting information, but one of the things he said that I found stunning was that he straight up asked the detectives at one point what they think happened. I don't know the context of why they said this, but they look very strongly at the possibility of a security guard or an employee bringing her to the roof and letting her go out onto the roof. It would explain why the alarm was not active. It explains why the alarm didn't go off, which it should have. If she went there by herself, the alarm should have gone off. So if the fact that it didn't go off and that she got on the roof, and the police are saying that they think someone showed her to the roof, and we know from other tenants that people regularly go out on that roof. Basically, I came to the conclusion that I think one of the employees offered to give her a tour and brought her to the roof. But it's just so difficult to know for sure what happened, and it's a lot of the information out there is just wrong. I mean, 9 times out of 10, people's assertions about this case are just wrong, because there's just too much disinformation, and there's too much, stigmatization of her as a person.
It
And
has a
even the news stories, when you're looking at some of the news stories with the dates, and then you go to her blog, and I'm gonna trust her blog entries before that. Like that was her person, or her personal experience. But even sometimes the news stories weren't even correct.
Right.
Now, I had a quick question. So on her blog, actually, she talks about the speakeasy and how she had a great time, but she lost the cell phone there. I could not find anyone that got interviewed or talked to at any of the speakeasies nearby. And I
CCTV
feel like,
footage, anything.
I'm sorry?
Like CCTV footage from the alleyway, the restaurant itself, like
Yeah,
anything.
just nothing. And like the speakeasy, I feel like, if there was, let's say, someone kind of being weird around her, or, maybe she asked, I don't know, one of the bouncers or the bartender or something and said, hey, like this person won't stop following me. I don't know. But what if something happened there as well and no one's ever thought to look?
Right. So the only information I have on that speakeasy, I mean, I was literally calling speakeasy type bars. I was calling the hostels in San Diego. I mean, I was really trying to find any information I could find. The only information I have on that is from the guy who did the metadata analysis of her posts. And based on that, I mean, based on that information, you can determine the type of device that was being used, so you can determine whether it was a mobile phone or a desktop, and you can get the exact time and the exact geolocation of it. Based on what he assessed, he thinks that she lost her second phone at that speakeasy,
Hmm.
because 3 hours after her that post about it is when she starts talking about losing her phone again. And based on his analysis of the device, at the first part of the night, she was using her phone to post. And then later in the night, it was like a desktop in the lobby of the hotel.
Interesting.
And So he thinks that she lost her second phone at that speakeasy.
That's interesting because on the same night, I believe on the 27th for both. Speaking of the creeper post, she says, "I'm going out tonight. I really hope no creeper comes near me. Seriously though, those Italian and Mexican guys go after you strong. Show the slightest inclination and they hound you." And then it appears that she went to the speakeasy, and then the speakeasy was awesome, except I lost a cell phone. Sigh.
And look at the
no.
hashtags for that.
And it's not even mine, it's my friend's. And then the one before, good God, a hashtag for the creeper post, hashtag good God, I just want to listen to some good jazz. So yeah. And then we have after the 27th, Amanda, are you following the next thing on the timeline to the 28th?
Yeah, so she had that post on the 29th, which got me confused about where she was staying because she talks about the monstrosity of the building next door that she's staying at.
Right.
And
I had a thought on that. No, sorry to interrupt.
no, that's kind of confusing to me because I don't know if she's referring to the Hotel Cecil or if it was like how you could publish posts at a different time if she accidentally pressed publish it a couple days later.
So I think what happened is I think she checked in on the 26th, and then I think the confusion that's happening is that when she was moved to a different room, I think that happened on like the 29th or something like that.
Okay.
I think that's where the confusion is, that she checked into one room with these two other women, and then she ultimately was checked into another room. That would be one explanation for why there's differing timelines on that.
I'm just so
Okay.
floored that we have no information whatsoever about the people who she was rooming with first. You would
know.
think that they would be like loud and proud all over the news. Yes, most people are. Yes, I stayed with her. She was in my room. She was weird. Some sort of information. Like a lot of people love the attention
I
from
know.
the press.
I can't believe we haven't spoken with those women. It really makes me a little suspicious as to whether they even exist. I mean, I don't know.
It's like the police, the LAPD completely dropped the ball on this because I noticed that with a lot of accidental drownings and stuff, they kind of don't really. It's very easy for them to write it off, and they leave so much ambiguity. So here we are questioning so many things, being like, "Why didn't you do that?"
There's no reason to trust them. Period. So the LAPD, first of all, the main detective on this case, Tennille. I don't want to cast too many aspersions. Strangely enough, his own son was murdered in cold blood only a few years before that case.
Oh wow!
But, he got his chops. He started in department within the LAPD that was supposed to be the most brutal, cutthroat division, and they ended up all getting rolled in this giant scandal called the Rampart scandal, which basically showed that cops were just straight up fabricating evidence, bringing guns so that they could set people up, that they would just let people bleed out. Just really crazy stuff. And I document all of this in the book.
Was that the Crash unit? The community resources against street hoodlums, like Crash, like the anti-gang unit?
Right, Crash. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
And so if you trace the recent history, you don't even have to go that far back, the recent history of the LAPD, and then you catch up with more recent stuff that was going on at the exact same time. So first of all, and this is a very important point that I make in the book several times. So the exact week that this investigation was going down was the same week that Charles Dorner went on his cop killing spree in Los Angeles. Charles Dorner was a former LAPD cop, a black cop, who he wrote a manifesto saying that the entire LAPD was corrupt, racist, and he went on a rampage of straight up assassinating people. He literally declared war. He declared asymmetrical war on the LAPD.
Oh, it's fucking terrifying.
And was a total whistleblower and talked about all these horrible things they've done, which is corroborated by other things. And then they had to chase him down into a cabin in the woods. And if you believe them, he killed himself, or if you believe any rational thing, which is that they basically killed him in this cabin. But that's a whole other thing. But the point is, there's absolutely every reason to think that they put in a minimal amount of work on this investigation, because it was going down exactly during that Charles Dorner manhunt, which would have completely taken all the oxygen out of the room of that investigation.
I'm
And
completely
then,
floored right now because all I remember, I don't remember Elisa Lam case happening in any capacity. I'm new to the Elisa Lam case because I was living in New England at that time. But damn, I remember the Dorner case was. I mean, every news channel like on television, everything was Dorner. You know, the
yeah,
manhunt and where he was and what was happening, and then the robot squad thing like sent in like that took over everything.
yeah. And that was contemporaneous with
Wow.
uh, Elisa's investigation. And then finally, just one more point about the LAPD. So it was reported at that time, and I don't have the source on me right here, but it's in the book. So the a high-ranking member of the LAPD basically blew a whistle and said that uh, the highest members of the LAPD were systematically misreporting homicides. Basically, they were fudging their own numbers to make it look like the homicide rate had gone down in the city.
Yeah, I actually
Okay,
saw that on the crime reports that they
yeah.
actually reported that less murders were committed in Skid Row area and stuff.
Right. So that was bullshit. They made that up. So at the same time as you have them issuing this very weird autopsy, and we definitely have to get into the autopsy because I have information on that too. But at the same time that they're trying to make us believe in this accidental death, it just so happens they're systematically underreporting homicides at that time.
Yeah.
Convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um
it'd be easier to say it's an accidental death rather than a homicide too. That
Right.
would go
Well,
That's
it
along with
stops
the
it.
narrative.
Yeah, once they say that, then they're like, washed hands, we're good, all done. We don't have to put any more energy into it.
Now,
right.
are we at a place now where we can get to the most infamous aspect of this case?
So, like we said, the 31st then, the phone call stopped with her parents. She was seen at that bookstore we discussed. And then February 1st, early morning, is when that elevator footage was taken. Now, that wasn't released to the public yet. So she's gone. She's gone already. The parents have reported her missing. The police host a press conference with LAPD. You can Google that. It's on YouTube all over. One thing that stands out to me with that press conference is the cell phone question. And that this is right before they release the elevator video. But someone does say, "Hey, do you have her cell phone?" or something along those lines.
Right.
And he responds, "I don't want to talk about the cell phone right
Yeah.
now."
That's funny you bring that up because that I think that's a very interesting moment from that as well.
Yeah, so he says we have some of her property. So he like very strategically doesn't mention if he actually has a cell phone or if that is actually gone. He just says some of her property. Did you
Right.
have anything about the cell phone that I cannot locate? Have you talked to anyone in regards to
And,
where it is?
so this is one of the little tidbits of information that I discovered, and like I told you guys before, like in the same way that like when an actor is promoting a movie on a late night talk show right before it comes out, they don't give away spoilers, you know. So
Right.
like and there's some things I'm not gonna go into, and mostly because there's so much disinformation that's come out from this case. I'm very particular about about the right having the right context. I don't want people to take things that I've said out of context and then start all these new rumors. Having said that, I did speak with a bouncer at the restaurant right next to the hotel. Been there for a while. It's kind of a old timey French dip place, but it was totally on a lark. I think I was just there getting like a beer or something in between canvassing the neighborhood or something. And I just happened to ask the bouncer if he'd heard of the case. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of the case." And you know, he was saying, "Yeah, her friends had come asking questions that week or something like that." And then he said, and he basically told me that an off-duty cop had told him that they found some of her things in a dumpster in Skid Row.
What?
Yeah. And
No.
for me, that was such a big bombshell that I was just shocked, and I really wanted to make sure that we were talking about the same case because it's very easy for information to get cross-contaminated. Maybe he was talking about another case, or maybe the
Right.
off-duty cop was talking about another case. He was very adamant that this, and it's possible the cop was lying, or it's possible the cop had no idea what he's talking about.
Right.
But what he said, I mean, to me, that if it's true, obviously, that would almost single-handedly confirm some type of foul play or cover up.
Yes, for sure.
There's that's already, like you said, that was a big question of where her stuff was. What the hell would any of her stuff be doing in a dumpster in Skid Row?
Right. Unless it was the one that was, lost that night and someone's like, oh, shoot, like this has pictures of her. I'm dumping it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good point. Yeah. I hadn't even, yeah, that could be it. That could be what they found. But he said some of her stuff. He didn't say
Right.
one thing. He said some of her stuff. So
Exactly.
it's not, I'm not holding that up on a pedestal saying, oh, I solved the case or something. But it's definitely a new piece of information that hasn't been out there. And one would think that people like this guy who, he didn't want to go on the record or anything, is pretty adamant about that too. One would think that someone like that would hopefully have been interviewed by the police, unless, if we're assuming the police were even trying to solve the case.
Right.
I can imagine workers like that too actually do hear a lot.
Oh, yeah.
A lot from police officers or just locals and discussions and things like that. So it's appalling that police didn't really follow up any leads like that.
Well, and that would make sense though, the way he was so dismissive of that one question, but totally answers the other ones pretty openly, it seems. Like his body language seems like, don't ask me that.
Yeah.
So that's the vibe I got, at least when I watched it, is he was like offended that question even occurred.
Yeah, I thought it was strange too, for sure.
Yeah. So right after that, then still no luck, no sightings, no new information. So we move on to the 15th, and that's when LAPD released the elevator video as the last known sighting of Elisa Lam.
And this is where Conspiracy Grand Central Station commences.
Right. It went viral. It was everywhere. And if you haven't seen the video, of course, we will add a link to it.
Yep.
First thoughts of seeing it. I remember the first night I saw it, and it just gave me chills because it was so, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know where she is. Is she talking to someone? What's with the hand movements? And then recently, after looking up the case a lot more, there are so many crazy things that happen with this video too, as far as how fast or slow it's going at times. And I didn't even notice at the time. You can't see the timestamp.
Or the date, any of it. And what's in doing further research for this case too, what's also fascinating is the fact that there are almost as many opinions as there are experts who speak to it. You know what I mean? So you have body language experts, domestic violence counselors, all of these people coming together to discuss her movements in this elevator and what she looked like, what they believed her to be doing, and it's all different there too.
And Jake, I don't know if you know what you think about the video, but I've seen several now different, if you YouTube it, there's so many different variations of this video now. Oh, yeah. And they're saying a minute looks like it's missing, about 54 seconds, I believe.
Right.
Yeah, they speed it up at times and slow it down at times to make up for this missing time. And people go on to say the elevator's open and someone walks by that doesn't want to be associated, or possibly a hotel employee walks by and they definitely don't want their face to be there, because then it looks like the hotel employee didn't stop to ask if she was okay or needed anything.
Right. Yeah. The surveillance tape is definitely a source of a lot of conspiracy theories. I mean, honestly, you wouldn't even believe some of the conversations I've had with conspiracy theorists. This one guy, it's not even worth going into.
Now I'm curious.
I'll come back to it. It's just the most unhinged stuff ever, and it goes kind of into that kind of the Rorschach nature of the case, where people that believe in paranormal activity, they're going to think that she was possessed. People that think it was a total accident of mental illness say, this is textbook psychomotor agitation. The way her arms were moving is, a very clear symptom of bipolar disorder, which is true. And then people that believe in homicide, of course, are going to point out the time code as evidence that, they cut the time code to cut out someone else passing in the hallway. So, yeah, I was obviously very obsessed with with tape. I interviewed two different body language experts about it. And then I really looked at that time code. I tried to get an expert to tell me whether there was any kind of digital manipulation. So basically, with the time code, yeah, first of all, it's and as pointed out by John Lorden, who runs the Brain Scratch YouTube channel. It's very. I mean, time code is very important. Time code is preserved and used in court all the time to help both prosecution and defense. It's considered a very important forensic element of things like videotapes. And the fact that this time code was so absolute, I mean, it looks like alien Sanskrit. It's like you can't even make heads or tail of it. However, you can tell where the hour hand is, where the minute hand is, and where the second hand is, and then where the microsecond hand is. You can tell that based on how quickly they're moving. You can see where the microseconds are, rapid firing, and right next to that, you can see where it's changing every second. You can't tell what it says because it's so distorted. And then right next to that one clearly is the minute hand, and next to that, the hour. So there's a point in the videotape, and probably at my most conspiratorial, I discovered this, and it really kind of blew my mind. So this guy, he did a whole video comparing, basically saying that he thinks the video was slowed down, and he compares the two, and he says there's a minute missing. All I can say is that there is a point in the video, it happens at about 3:23, I think, where the minute hand changes, okay? She leaves the elevator. 7 seconds later, the minute hand changes again.
Right. I've seen that video.
So the minute hand changes twice in 7 seconds. Now, the most rational rebuttal to that is, well, this is a motion-activated surveillance camera, so it's only going to record when there's motion, and that just happens to be where it cut for that. But it also just so happens that that's the exact place where you would want to cut it to try and get rid of something, because there was no other movement in there. When there's no movement, if anyone who knows anything about video editing knows, if there's nothing moving in the frame at all, you can cut it and take out 10 seconds and put it back together, and you won't even know that anything has changed. And so that's the exact second where this cut happens, is right after she leaves the videotape. So obviously minute hands don't change twice in 7 seconds.
No.
So,
Right.
so this is a big question. And the LAPD, of course, refused to talk about it steadfastly. They will not talk about it. I got close to getting one guy to talk about it, and he said, I'm going to talk to the lead detective. And then the next day he ghosted me and like literally blocked my email address.
Wow.
So there's no, I mean, we can't say for sure. We don't know whether the tape was edited.
Now,
But-
for listeners, like one piece of information regarding at least the elevator as a whole is that there was a kind of delay set for the elevator for residents who were moving like furniture, couches, things like that. When you open the elevator, call for an elevator, how long do you recall it stays open before the doors close?
Yeah, I tested that a little bit. John Lorden did a really big test on that, and he has a video on the case that really breaks down that. But basically, he went there in person and tested it out, and he says that it checks out, that it takes a while for the door to close, that it stays open for a while. And you have to remember that she had pressed a whole bunch of buttons
Yes.
on there. So that's definitely a question that comes up over and over and over again, of people saying, why did the door stay open for so long? It's eerie. I mean, it definitely adds an eeriness to it. I'm not sure there's a whole lot there in terms of, I don't know what that would suggest, that the door was staying open long.
I guess like with my initial interpretation, the first time, I mean, I was living basically in Boston when this happened, and I remember the Dorner investigation. I didn't hear of Elisa Lam literally until almost a year ago. I'm so embarrassed, or even less than, I'm embarrassed to admit. So when I first saw the video, we see her, opening the elevator. It looks like she's like, hey, why the hell isn't this closing? And then she just kind of like immediately just starts tapping all the buttons. And then it looks to me like she keeps looking at the doors like, why aren't these closing? Why aren't these closing? She looks confused. And so at least, you know, when I'm watching the video, that's what I see is just someone, you know, confused. Why the hell isn't this closing? And then it's the point when she gets out of the elevator and kind of looks, it's almost like her demeanor changes, and she looks, to me at least, she looks almost like frightened, or
Right.
at least, you know, looking at someone, something. There's a moment in the elevator where the situation changes, to me at least, of what I'm seeing.
Well, yeah, I mean, she jumps back in and hides in the corner.
Yeah, and then peers kind of like around and out.
I kind of wonder if she thought maybe there was motion activated. And if
Right,
she,
I
like,
read that too.
If she was hiding
Right,
in the
we
corner,
could
maybe she
explain
should
why she did that little wavy motion with her hand
Uh-huh.
in the doors. Yeah, I think that's actually what she was doing. And, you know, going back over it, I've come to the conclusion that I don't even really think she's acting that strange. I know that may be counterintuitive, but I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm alone, like I talk to myself, like I
That's
do
what I
all
said.
kinds of strange things, and I think most people do. Like we're strange creatures. We do strange things. I don't necessarily. I mean, you know, if I'm standing somewhere and I'm uncomfortable, maybe I'll stand in a slightly awkward position to try and stretch my back or something. There's all kinds of reasons why people would do strange behaviors like that, and
That's true.
not to mention the fact that she was, you know, probably having some symptoms from bipolar. But I think the moment that's, you know, kind of hard to look away from is the part where she is very clearly spooked by something.
Yes.
And for a moment, it even looks like she's almost like talking to someone outside.
Because I could completely
Right.
explain, you know, I would be that person that would get in an elevator. I'm, you know, these doors aren't closing. Well, fine. I have nothing else to do. I'm just exploring. I'll hit every damn button on this panel. You know, like I would be
Yeah.
that
Right.
person. Like I didn't think, you know, twice of that. It's when she gets in there and becomes visibly what appears to be spooked is when the eyebrow kind of raises.
No, you did say that you had body language interpreters look at it.
Yeah.
What did they say, if I may ask?
Well, this one guy had already written a big post on it. It's called his site is called Body Language Success, and he did a really huge breakdown of it. And then I spoke with another body language expert who also analyzed it, and you know, they go into some, you know, really kind of clinical terminology for kind of academic terminology for how they express things. But basically, they both agreed that her emotional condition is kind of fluctuating throughout it. And that she is the main takeaway I got from this main guy who did the body language analysis was that he keeps referring to these kinds of displays of affectionate behavior. And the woman who analyzed it too agreed that they basically think that she was either thinking about a suitor or was avoiding a suitor, or there was some kind of what they call sexual preening going on, which is that the way she holds her legs and her hands is indicative to them that she was kind of shy, and then she's expressing these kinds of you know, kind of dominant displays of emotional affectation to lead them to believe that she's thinking about someone, a suitor, an encounter that she's either had before, is about to have, or, you know, so, but I mean, that doesn't determine anything. It could be someone who's not at the hotel, or it could be someone who's at the hotel. But the body language, I mean, body language is not an exact science. It's a social science, but it is increasingly used. And it's interesting to look at the body language of this, because it kind of does seem like, based on what they're saying, it kind of does seem like she is thinking about someone she either has a crush on, or maybe someone who has a crush on her that's making her feel uncomfortable.
That would kind of go hand in hand with her blog posts and her personality and just kind of how she's so playful. It would seem that she probably has a pretty, you know, vivid imagination. She seemed rather articulate in her blog posts too. It's not like out of the ordinary for somebody to be alone and kind of like have an imaginary conversation going on in their head either, especially
Sure.
if they like somebody. Just kind of youthful, playful in a sense, I guess.
Right. Yeah, there was definitely a playfulness to some of her motions that, and it makes it even more confusing because it's like if there's someone stalking her, it's kind of hard to explain some of her behavior, you know? Like she acts scared at one point and hides in the corner, but then she kind of acts loose and calm and you know, like it's not a big deal and that she's just kind of hanging out. So,
Which to
I don't know.
me like indicates that I don't think she ever seemed to like her body language to me at least. I'm not an expert, but I would say that she didn't seem like she was in danger. It seemed more like she was playful and she was just trying to figure out the elevator, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's that's an interpretation that's totally fair for sure.
And I have one question too. So you've Amanda mentioned that the video was made public on February 15th for the world, and that's when it went viral. In your research, has had the LAPD in any capacity, did anyone speak with you about it? Like, did the LAPD actually even look at the footage, like beyond just a quick glance? Did they have a behavioralist or a body language expert take a look at it too, or was that just a very small piece that they
Yeah,
made
was it
public?
submitted for forensics even?
If they did, they haven't talked about it, and I can only assume that they looked at it. But um, the the transmission of the tape. I mean, one of the aspects of the surveillance tape that is so most mysterious to me is how it was given to the public. So originally, it was posted on the YouTube channel of this journalist named Dennis Ramiro, and he writes for the LA Weekly. So Dennis Ramiro, his father worked a lot with the LAPD, so I think he has some connection with them. So I guess at some point maybe they decided that. I mean, so I mean, I can't stress enough how strange this is to me that the LAPD post this official video, but they're using this journalist's YouTube channel to do it. And Ramiro will not talk about it. Like I came to him in the most professional way I could. This guy he took his video down. Originally he had the video that got the most views, like 5 million views or something. It was his account, his channel that he put. That's where it aired. That's He would not explain. Can you please just answer, how did you come in possession of this? Why did the LAPD give you this tape? And he would not talk to me.
Do you
Wow.
know if it's the exact same amount of time as the one that we see today?
The one that's currently up there, I don't even know. The one that I used to go to watch has been taken down. This was the one posted by Ramiro that he put. Initially he didn't have his Twitter handle on there, but I guess realizing how many views it was getting, at one point he had put his Twitter handle on there. We don't know why he had it, and we don't know why the LAPD chose to transmit it to him to post, or really what were hoping to accomplish. The only point of posting a surveillance tape of someone like that is if it's going to help you identify a suspect
Hmm.
or to identify the person. As a foreign national, they said they were going to pay more attention to this. But that tape does not identify her. You can't tell who that is. It's too pixelated.
Right.
And it doesn't identify any suspect. So why exactly did they show that? Were they expecting millions of people? I don't think they were expecting millions of people or the case to go viral. What were they trying to do exactly?
Were they just trying to make it look like she was crazy the way that they doctored
Absolutely.
it so
That's
that they're
what I
like,
think.
sorry, she went crazy and died,
That's what I think. Yeah.
yeah. And kind of to circle back to the elevator, I did speak with a friend who stayed there in 2014. And her name's Nora. What she had expressed is when she checked in, the first thing the check in person told her is, hey, elevator probably won't work. Go ahead and try it, but it doesn't always work. It's just like that. So you might have to take the stairs. And of course, surprise, surprise, she gets in it. It doesn't close. It doesn't work.
Hmm.
And then as she checked out, I don't remember how many days she stayed there. She said someone yelled like it was like exciting that the elevator was working. So she got to take her luggage into the elevator and it wouldn't close for the longest time. So as far as, her reaction to it not closing, I don't know if back then they would, that's kind of part of the check-in process. Hey, our stuff doesn't work. So,
Right.
if I got into an elevator at a hotel and it wouldn't close, I feel like, yeah, I'd look around like, hey, is there a person coming? Is there like an employee that maybe the key thingy's stuck? Like, I don't know. But even in 2014, they were still having these elevator issues. You know, there's probably tons of surveillance footage of people going, what the hell?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of awkward opportunities for videos.
Yeah. And the way that she peeks around, my interpretation is, okay, like you said, Robin, she looks confused. It's not closing. So she kind of peeks around like, anyone? Anyone can help me? And then that, after that, it gets a little strange with the hand movements. But then other things I've read too is, how if it was cut, are they cutting out someone that was standing outside of it?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's the big question is, if it was, if it was edited. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the $1 million question there. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we're ever going to find out.
No, I wonder if that first video, though, is any sort of different. Is it a little more clear? Does it show the timestamp better? Does it have a couple extra seconds to it? That's interesting that it's taken down.
Right. Yeah. No. It was the same one. It was just.
It was. Okay.
Yeah. It was. I don't know why he took it down. Actually.
Did he
But-
say that the LAPD gave it to him?
No, he wouldn't confirm it. But that's what was so weird to me is that the video. This wasn't on like the LAPD YouTube channel. This wasn't on the LAPD public homepage. This video first aired on this random journalist's YouTube channel. And yeah, how did he get it? Why did they give it to him? There's a story there. And the fact that it could be a boring story, maybe, but the fact that he won't address it at all, I can't tell you how many times I came at him, practically begging, like, dude, can you just seriously tell me why do they give it to you? You could answer it in like one sentence. It wouldn't even be a big deal. The fact that he refuses to talk about it just adds one more layer of weird conspiratorial strangeness to it that no one will talk. Like, I understand the family not talking. That's totally their prerogative.
Yeah.
But the hotel won't talk about it. The LAPD won't talk about it. Even this random journalist. Journalists are supposed to talk about stuff. Journalists are supposed to be about transparency. How did this guy get this tape? And why was he charged with displaying it to the public for 5 years?
Very strange.
I wonder if he got a source from the hotel to get it to him. I mean,
maybe
just to kind of go at every angle on it. I mean, that's one way. I know a lot of journalists kind of can deep dive like that, but it's odd that you have this case that almost feels like it never even happened to a degree. Like, all you have is the autopsy report. You have that video, which is, could be questionable. We don't know,
Right.
Someone literally just disappeared.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or maybe she had a fabricated life. We just don't know. We all we have really is I'm not trying to get to in the clouds on it, but it's just kind of odd to me that you have someone who could have been murdered, but even though the autopsy doesn't show any I want to talk about the autopsy.
Yeah,
we're almost there.
Yeah.
We're almost there.
So Amanda, what is next on the timeline past?
So 4 days later, guests of the hotel complained about water pressure, smell, taste, and look of the water. They were saying that it would come out black at first and then run clear. Someone had mentioned a sweet, disgusting taste at one point, a very strange taste. They were having a hard time describing it. What happened is maintenance worker Santiago Lopez went up to the roof to take a look at the water tanks. And what he said, and this was on one of the interviews that I was able to find, he says, I noticed the hatch to the main water tank was open and looked inside and saw an Asian woman lying face up in the water approximately 12 inches from the top of the tank. So many questions with the discovery of the body.
So we're going to go ahead and conclude part 1 of our look into the Elisa Lam case right now. Part 2 will be coming in just a couple days on Thursday. So we will be picking up and discussing the discovery of her body, the impending LAPD investigation, and then Jake is going to provide the meat of his insights, like new things that he discovered on this case when he went to Los Angeles and started investigating and speaking with original members of the law enforcement team, medical examiner, coroner, and so forth. So you definitely will not want to miss that. In the meantime, if you want to maybe listen to our older episodes or just stay up to date, know when the new one drops, don't forget to go to iTunes, Stitcher, whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, and subscribe. And we would really further appreciate it if you would leave us a review. That's what means the most to us, is getting those reviews if you want to help the podcast. So the new episode will be coming out. In the meantime, if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at We Saw the Devil. We're on Facebook at that name. You can follow us on Instagram at We Saw the Devil Podcast. And as always, our website, WeSawTheDevil.com. And thanks again, and we will see you in a couple days with Part 2 with Jake Anderson looking into the Elisa Lam case.